Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
I think as B2B sales and marketing professionals, it's really about us getting in our customers' shoes. We're the ones asking for something, right? And so it's not for them to adjust to our world. It's for us to adjust to their world.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most listened to B2B sales show. If you haven't already, make sure to click subscribe. And with that, let's meet today's guest.
Hi, I'm Ken Rutsky. You can find me at kenrutsky.com. I'm a B2B marketing and sales go-to-market consultant, and I'm excited to be here.
On this episode of the show with Ken, we're diving into the buyer's worldview. What the heck that actually means, how we can leverage it as a tool to become a strategic partner in large enterprise accounts, and a whole lot more. So with that, let's jump right in. Is there a definition of what a worldview is? Is there a way to describe it? Is there a metaphor? What the heck is a worldview, Ken?
Yeah, I view it as a viewpoint. What's the viewpoint that my customer has? How do they see the world, right? What is their worldview? And how do we connect our value into that? And I think as B2B sales and marketing professionals, it's really about us getting in our customers' shoes. We're the ones asking for something, right? And so it's not for them to adjust to our world. It's for us to adjust to their world.
Got it. And I'm saying this at the top of my head, but would it be a fair way to describe it as a portal that people are looking through, or a window where there's perhaps stuff going on outside the world that they don't really care about because they can't see it, but perhaps our view is slightly different because we're looking out of a different window or a different angle? Would that be an appropriate way to describe it?
I think that's an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I kind of view like I've got a buyer, and that buyer, has, to be a little cliche, right? There's things that get them excited to get out of bed in the morning, and there's things that make them scared and worried and nervous. And so those things, are happening to them, whether we can do anything about them or not. So, for example, if my buyers, let's say in sales and marketing, just as an example, they're bombarded with marketing technology that's changing and sales technology that's changing their job. Now, I might be able to help them with that bombardment. I would actually be adding to it, but I need to be cognizant of it. And I need to understand that part of their challenge is sorting through all that stuff.
So how, and this seems like such a basic, ridiculous question, because a lot of this, or the first step is for us to understand that we're not at the buyers aren't thinking about us when they're not on the phone with us, right? This is a real shock to most salespeople, and myself,
Yeah, exactly.
myself included, that the world does not revolve around us. So that's the first thing to get over. But it seems like a super basic, simple question to ask, but I'm not really sure on the process to achieving it of how do we really know what the worldview of a buyer is without sitting them down on a leather couch, reclined, and interviewing them or psychoanalyzing them for kind of 4 hours a week?
Yeah, and I think it's really knowing your buyer and your market, right? And so there are some techniques you can use. One of them is a technique I call a STEEP assessment. Now, I know a lot of your listeners are actually the actual salespeople, and I usually work with marketers to do this, but I think a salesperson can do this too. And STEEP is an old, it's like a SWOT. If some of your listeners have heard of SWOT, STEEP's just another one of these, consulting things, and it stands for society, technology, economics, environment, and politics. And if I want to understand what's going on for my buyer, I kind of can ask, what's happening in society that's impacting them? What's happening in technology? What are the economic issues they're facing as in their job, right? And in their industry? Are there any environmental issues, either internal to the firm that they're in or externally? And are there any politics could be regulation, it could be trade. So if I kind of step back and, I might sell a widget that only really deals with, let's say, technology, but my buyer lives in the real world, right? And if I want to, it almost goes back to, I'm an IBM trained sales rep from decades ago. And, the first step in the IBM sales process was always establish empathy, right? Establish rapport and get empathy. And so, the way I establish rapport, I think in today's world is a little different than me saying, Hey, Will, that what kind of sports car is that on on your desk there? I drive a sports car too. Or hey, I see your son is a sailor. I'm a sailor too. Now, all that kind of salesy rapport building, that there's still a place for that because it is people to people, right? But the bigger thing that buyers want in B2B now is they want someone to walk in and really understand the business and the job that they have because they don't want to take the time to educate you. They expect you to come in educated.
So if we take economics out of the acronym for a second, so we're at STEP then, aren't we? A shorter acronym.
Now we're at STEP, or maybe TEST.
Sure. So because I believe that regular listeners to the audience will hopefully understand the economics of the environment that the buyer's in, perhaps the economic of the buyer's customer, and all these things. We talk about this regularly. But the other things within the acronym we don't really talk about. Is there a best bang for buck in for B2B salespeople doing relatively large deal sizes? Is there a best bang for buck, one of those that we can perhaps touch on a little bit further that would paint a picture of how we can get into the mind of the buyer?
Yeah, a lot of my clients are technology vendors, right? So they're so steeped in technology. I have to get them out of technology. But technology is impacting everything. And, I think that's one of the challenges today for any sales rep is even if I'm selling something that's not very high tech, there's something about the way that product or service is delivered or the way it's communicated or the way my buyer does their job that's being impacted by technology. So really peeling back and saying, what are the technical things that happen could be a really powerful discussion to have with one of your buyers, even if you're not selling a technology.
And how do we ask questions about something that we're not selling that adds value rather than just sucks it, if that makes sense? Because it's one
sucks the air out of the room.
but it's one thing if someone rings me up and says, hey, Will, I've got this product or service, I'll ask you a few discovery questions, we can go through it, we'll see if it's a good fit. I'm more likely to engage in a conversation there versus someone who's selling a technology who rings me up and is asking about the environment or my concerns or my business impacts, if that makes sense. So
yeah, I think that's a great question. I'm not a huge believer anymore in solution selling. I think you have to take more of a challenge or educational approach to selling today. So if there's something technologically happen, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. I'm selling bulk chemicals, maybe, right? And one of my competition is now an online marketplace where people can get pricing online for bulk chemicals. Well, that has a huge impact on me as a seller. And so what I might go in and say to my buyer is, when I talk to other buyers like you, they're really interested in online marketplaces. But one of the challenges I've seen with them is this. What have you seen as challenges with the online marketplaces for products like mine? Right. And so kind of coming in with a point of view that is relevant to your buyer is really important today. And that's, I think, you get more permission to ask when you ask a question that makes them think, as opposed to just a question that's me obviously trying to suck information out of you.
So the starting point is a value statement, a insight, if we go down the challenger route, and then perhaps understanding the worldview can come after the fact. Yeah,
and let's transition a little to worldview, because the way I write about it in my book, what a worldview is, I call it a viewpoint story. And I think, most of us want to come in as salespeople, and I sell all the time, so I'm no different. And we want to be the hero. Well, I got bad news. We're not the hero. We need to make our customer the hero. And so when we think about our customer, they're bombarded with choices of things to buy, and I have to become strategic to their life. And so the way I do that is, first, I understand their world. Second, I relate my value to some gap that they have in achieving one of their strategic objectives. And then I describe how I can get them there. Now, Challenger calls that strategic insight, or I think business insight, right? Or commercial insight, actually. I say it's, if I really want to make an impact, make my product magical so that it transforms the buyer's world to a better place. And it's all modeled after something called the hero's journey.
So tell us about the hero's journey, because I feel like we intrinsically know it from every Hollywood film of all time ever. But then I want to then relate it back to perhaps a couple of B2B examples of this as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. A guy named Joseph Campbell in the early 40s was a cultural anthropologist. He was a Yank, as you guys would say, Yankee, and he studied all of our mythologies, and he basically came up with this metaphor of the hero's journey. And what he said is that all these great mythologies follow the same thing. Now, George Lucas called Joseph Campbell his Yoda. So that's high praise.
Sure.
Yeah, I think you can look at the Harry Potter movies. Harry follows the hero's journey many times. Basically, what happens is the hero's living their life. They get disrupted. They get sucked into an alternative reality. Maybe I'm a train from station 12 and a half or whatever it was. 2.5, is it? Or 2 3/4? My kids would know.
Yep.
And they enter this alternative reality where they have a death or near-death experience. They meet the god or goddess. They get a magical gift, and they return to their world to transform it to a better place. And what we want to do is we want to tell the story that takes our customers' reality and points out maybe some of those challenges back to commercial insight, and then says, hey, have you ever thought of having this magic, which is the thing I can provide you, and how that could transform your world? So we're taking ourselves out of the center of the story and putting our customer in the center of it.
So how does that work? So my first job, coincidentally, was selling chemicals or chemical catalyst and precious metals.
Oh, well, there you go. I might have picked a bad, more than I do.
I was terrible and got sacked from it, so we won't go that far as to my knowledge there. But with that said, how do we translate Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, or Game of Thrones may or may not end in the hero's journey, typical outcome?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one.
And I'm behind on watching it, so I won't mention it for the rest of the show in case anything crops up in conversation. But with all that said, how do we translate all of these stories into one of my customers that I'm selling, a customer in the pharmaceutical industry that I'm selling chemical catalyst to, which is a black powder?
Yeah, so let's take a look at that. Let's say that economically, one of the pressures that pharmaceutical companies might be under is landed cost of goods, right? And maybe I do something unique around the way I price and structure my pricing around landed costs, and I can say, hey, if you could reduce, if you could just have your landed costs go down to 1% of your cost of goods versus 5%, how would that change your economics and you're meeting your strategic objective? Now that works, assuming that landed cost matters, right? Sure. So that's why understanding that buyer is so critical, because a lot of times we have benefits, that buyers don't care about. An example I like to use on that is if I'm selling to a manufacturer and I'm saying, I'm going to make you more efficient in your production processes in a tight labor market. And they're like, I've got all the people I can hire in the world and I don't need to be more efficient. Boy, good luck. On to the next one.
So is there an element of trial and error to this then, to a small extent, considering we're doing this from the salesperson's perspective rather than the resources of perhaps an organization who can, I don't know, group test this or test it in other means?
Yeah, I do take my clients through a process. It's in the book, Launching to Leading, of how to build a story like this. And I think a sales rep can apply that to their micro market or their individual market in a very similar way. I like to say that sales reps are kind of, for marketers, and I've mostly been a marketer, though I have been a sales rep. And I like to say the great marketers realize that the sales reps are their canary in the coal mine. Mm. The coal face, as you would say over in the UK. People at the coal face, they know more than the guys back in the factory. And so great salespeople do this kind of innately, and they know how to tell that story. And there is some structure that I put in the book that I think a sales rep could easily take and apply to their world. And that structure is simply kind of what we've talked about, which is, hey, what matters to the buyer? Back to the steep. What's their current way they solve a problem? And what gaps does that lead them? What's magical about me? And then how can that transform their world?
How much of all this, because you use the word magical then, which kind of sets up this question, how much of this is perceived value versus numbers that end up on a profit and loss account?
Yeah, I think today in today's world, if we don't have an ROI, we got a bigger problem, right? Like if I can't prove the ROI of my product or solution, then, I should find another, I should go trade my bag and go somewhere else. That's what I think. So let's just assume everyone I compete with has a positive ROI.
Sure.
The problem is the buyer is just inundated with positive ROI purchases they can make, right? So that's like cost of entry now for sellers. So I've got to become strategic. And if I can't, that's why I keep coming back to that first step of understanding your buyer's world, back to your worldview. Because if I can't connect to something that matters in the buyer's worldview, boy, I may have a great return on investment on the spreadsheet, but I don't even get into the consideration set.
And again, a super simple question here, and I'm almost reluctant to ask it because it seems the answer might be that the buyer says, that's great. But how do we know when we've really hit a nail with this? Because I know people, slowly but surely, I'm starting from nothing. We've got a little bit of budget for marketing tools, automation, this kind of stuff now. So I'm more and more because the audience know this, and I talk about it, and I encourage them to pitch me so I can kind of give them feedback on different things and essentially free consulting with them. I get lots of pitches for stuff, and I'm slowly encountering what you're describing here, Ken, of that makes sense on paper. I don't care about it. I've not got time. My one priority is X, Y, Z, and it perhaps would increase our revenue 4%, but if I get this one thing nailed, that'll increase our revenue by 50%. So how do we know when we are going back and forth with a potential customer, when we are in front of them, when we're presenting, whatever it is? How do we know when we've really hit the nail on the head? How do we know when we've really kind of done something magical or linked our product or service and the value that we can give as an individual to that magic in the buyer's mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes to the work of targeting in the front end. So if I'm a sales rep and I'm carrying, back to my example, something that improves labor productivity for, say, durable goods manufacturing, I better, before I even make my first call, know which segments within the market need to improve labor costs.
Sure.
Right? Because otherwise I'm just going to waste a lot of my time. And I kind of believe that there's going to be a lot of them, or else I wouldn't be in this job. So how do I get the intelligence to target correctly at the beginning? I think the second thing is, how do I relate to that buyer's emotional state and how I can impact that? Because we do buy on emotion. There's a lot of social psychology research that just time and time again says we make decisions on emotion and we justify with math, right? And so, great salespeople get that, and they get that intuitively, and they put into action by taking that role of a guide as opposed to a teacher, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I feel like that you said something at the end of that sentence, which I would like clarification of what's the difference between a guide and a teacher?
Well, I think the guide is taking the buyer along on the journey with them, right? I take the buyer on a journey and teach them something along the journey. But I think if we come in preachy and coming in like, super, super duper aggressive with like, well, Will, geez, if you didn't buy that, you'd be really stupid. And look at this spreadsheet and look at the savings, as opposed to, well, what I see in the market is that labor cost is a big issue. Is it an issue for you? Yeah, of course it is, Ken. I know. Okay, yeah, well, we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about that. But the common strategies I see to dealing with rising labor costs are these. What are the strategies you're employing? Well, because I'm smart and I knew that before I came in, right? I get the answers I expect. And then I have my next thing. Well, what I've experienced is when people take those approaches, here are some of the challenges they have, or the opportunities they don't get to take advantage of those, or those things that are meaningful to you. And so I'm guiding them through that process, as opposed to, starting at the end point and just saying, yeah, you got to have mine because I'm going to strategically make you better.
Sure. So it's the difference, to use just different words, but the same meanings of it's the difference between a coach and a university lecturer, perhaps.
I think that's right. I think great salespeople are teachers, but they're coaches also at the same time.
Sure. Amazing. Well, I think we both speak very fast, Ken, so we're covering a lot of ground here. There's one thing that I want to wrap up with, and this could be perhaps 7 podcasts worth of content all in one go. But does this all layer up? And from the perspective of, I don't want to just close one massive enterprise company. I want to close the massive enterprise company for one deal. I want to account manage them, right? I want them to become a key account. You've used the word strategic a number of times in the conversation. I want to become a strategic partner for them. is there an opportunity here to increase the level of partnership that we have by not just going at the environmental aspect of it, then tying ourselves and our value into the societal elements, into the political? Can we layer all of this up to have kind of a bigger impact rather than just using it kind of as a one shot?
Yeah, I think the approach I usually take is to get a list of all those things that are going on in my buyer's world, and then really try to filter those down into two dimensions. The first is, what are the ones that really matter the most to them, and the second is, which are the ones I can help with. So I may have a list of 20 things that are happening for that director of manufacturing that I'm selling to that I know are top of mind for him. 3 of those might be the most important ones, but I can't help him at all with them. Now, that might be nice coffee talk, but it's not part of my sales conversation. Now, hopefully one of the important ones or more will bubble up. And I need to magnify the ones that I can help with. I had a sales trainer, a guy named John Costigan, who's over here in the States. I don't know if you've ever run into John or not, but he has a great saying. He says, great salespeople find a hangnail and convince the buyer they need a tourniquet. And I could never use that without, referencing John, because it's such a great metaphor. So we really do need to amplify the pain that we can help with, as opposed to, just the things that only matter to them. But I do think we become strategic when we can provide advice and counsel around those things, not just directly in it.
It seems like, and this may exist, I'm relatively new to the world of consulting, and so I'm reading all kinds of content and books on it at the moment, but it seems like this could go into a consulting-like graph where you'd have how much it matters on one axis and how we can help on the other, and the further away from, I guess, the genesis of both axes would be the points that would be most worth discussing. And if we can't get far away down that end of the graph, then they're probably not a prospect for us. Would that be... maybe this is for people who are account management.
You could do that. The way I kind of think about it is that I'm holding a sieve, and I take this long list of 40 or 50 items that matter to the buyer, and I put them through a sieve, and I see which are the 10 or 15 that come out that are the most important. And then I say, shake them through the second sieve to say which ones can I help them with, and see which 3 to 5 float out to the bottom, and then focus my story around those 3 to 5. Look for a common theme between them, because often those things I can help with will fall in an area of a common theme, right? So I might have one benefit around, as long as we're on this example, labor productivity, but I might have a second one around employee engagement, and a third one around retention, right? So now I've kind of bucketed those things together, and I have a broader story to tell than just the one maybe ROI component.
So best case scenario, the audience and myself go through this exercise. We find 10 potential clients that we've not dealt with before, we've not interacted with before, and we've got this amazing story now with multiple layers that we can talk to them on at a strategic level, and that's the low-hanging fruit, right? What happens if it's evidently, it's probably not going to be as simple as that. What happens if we know that an organization has problems, we can help them strategically? Everything that we've discussed so far in the conversation makes sense, other than the buyer hasn't quite seen this through their worldview or the whole of that they're seeing the kind of universe through. Is it worth trying to convince or influence somebody that what we see as a real problem with our expertise in the industry and in the space, perhaps, that it is a problem? Or is that just such a difficult task that we should only ever try and focus on the low-hanging fruits that has already made these realizations?
Yeah, in general, I like to take an abundance mindcast. So I'm much more, when I got trained in IBM sales, there was a guy named Dave Peoples who used to do this presentation, 60 tips in 60 minutes. And one of the tips that always stuck out to me was, the second best answer in sales is no, right? And so I very much take that philosophy and combine that with like a Stephen Covey abundance philosophy. If I have a strong point of view that's aligned with a client segment, I want to find all the buyers that align with that before I worry about the ones who don't. Now, that can be challenging for an individual rep, depending on their territory and the structure of how they are assigned opportunity by the organization. So I could kind of empathize with the rep who's like, well, corporate says, here's the story. I don't need buyers that think like that, right? So then I better try to spin it to my market or tell my corporate guys, hey, I need some help here because I need a different story. That story, it doesn't work in, financial services in New York City or in the city in London. That might work in manufacturing, but it doesn't work for my financial services clients. Help me and get some help.
And we'll wrap up with this because I think this is really important. And it's something that I never cover on the show. Maybe I need to put some content together for it. We're always talking about the external stakeholders, our customers, and clearly our job is to drive revenue and to work with them and build new relationships and build value and strategic partnerships and all this cliche stuff that we talk about all the time. But we have internal stakeholders, right, of our management, the marketing team that are there to support us and help us. How valuable is it for marketing for us to feed back some of this stuff that this story you give me is bullshit, it doesn't work. Here's my spin on it that does work. How valuable is that for our internal stakeholders?
I think it just depends on the maturity of your marketing team. Honestly, the good marketing teams, like I said, they love field feedback because their job is to find what works and amplify it. And like I said, the best salespeople are the ones who they're the canaries in the coal mine. They know the early warning signs when competition arises. They understand the next trend in buyers. And so tapping into that for good marketers is critical. And I always think like everyone needs a friend. And it's great to be a friend to marketing, just like it's great for marketing to be a friend to sales.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I've never thought about it like that way before. But yeah, it should be a two-way street, right? And I'm sure it will be as things move forward and as sales changes over the decades to come as well. With that, Ken, I've got one question, mate, that I wrap up every show with, and that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I think it would be keep perspective. It's a long game. It's not just today's sale.
When you say a long game, what's a long game to you? Because this is as a entrepreneur / salesperson right now, this is a big realization for me. But what is a long game in your mindset?
Well, the long game is always the one that's longer than the one you're stuck in. So, yeah, I do think, look, I've got a few decades on me now, multiple decades in industry. And, it's the longest game is your life. And that's a, 40 to plus year career. But I think, as sales reps, we tend to focus on the quarter. And that's great because we have a goal to make, but we also need to keep our eye on the year. And then we also need to keep our eye on our career because, we may need to make a move for ourselves personally that maybe doesn't maximize our current earnings, but maximizes our opportunity in year 2 or 3 after that. So I think that that comes with age, that perspective. But I think that was what impatience is a beautiful asset until it's not.
Sure.
So.
Love it. I love it. Well, I appreciate that and clarifying for us. And with that, Ken, tell us where we can find the book and where we can find more about you, because I'm sure the audience, there's a lot more layers to all of this conversation for sure.
Yeah, so you can find more about me at kenrutsky.com. That includes a page about my book, Launching to Leading, how market leaders capture parades and drive movements. And so, Launching to Leading is a great read, and I encourage all salespeople to pick it up. And look forward to chatting with your audience in the future.
Good stuff. Well, I'll link to that, the book, the website, everything else that we've talked about. I'll link to the Challenger Sale as well for anyone who isn't familiar in the show note to this episode over at salesman.org. And with that, Ken, I want to thank you for your time, your insights on this. I feel like there's a level of strategy which we don't usually get to on the show, so I appreciate that, mate. And I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
I've enjoyed it much. Thank you.